The beginning of a large-scale war in Ukraine will be the end of the world order as we know it. If Russia does not get a severe, swift and decisive response now, this will mean a total bankruptcy of the international security system and international institutions which are tasked with maintaining the global security order. This is a grim scenario which will throw us back to the darkest times of the 20th century. Russia will not stop at Ukraine. If a permanent member of the UN Security Council succeeds in breaking literally all rules, other actors will be inspired by him and follow his pattern. We are currently at the middle of the largest security crisis in Europe since the Second World War. This crisis was created and is being escalated by one side unilaterally, by the Russian Federation. Russia's accusations of Ukraine are absurd. Ukraine has never threatened or attacked anyone. Ukraine has never planned and does not plan any such action. Ukraine has never planned and does not plan any military offensive in the Donbas, neither any provocations or acts of sabotage. It is ultimately absurd to suggest that Ukraine could have prepared for anything like this and waited for months until Russia amassed an enormous military force along our borders to proceed with such alleged plans. This absurdity defies basic logic.
The Biden administration says the beginning of a Russian invasion is underway. The head of NATO says they have hundreds of warships standing by in the Mediterranean Sea. Things are spiraling out of control. So how did we get here? The media explanation is basically Putin evil. But this explanation leaves out the core of the issue, which is NATO's expansion. NATO, which is short for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was originally formed at the beginning of the Cold War as an anti-Soviet military alliance composed of the US and Western European powers. Now, one might have thought that since the Soviet Union dissolved and is no longer socialist, there would no longer be a need for a NATO. But instead of disbanding, the NATO alliance actually expanded after the Cold War into several countries that were once part of the Soviet Union, although it rejected including Russia itself. For decades, basically all political figures in Russia, not just Putin, have objected to this NATO expansion as a repurposed military alliance aimed at encircling Russia. NATO claims it's a defensive alliance, but after the Cold War, NATO went on top of the governments of Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Libya. Given this history, Russia fears that it'll be the next target. Furthermore, Russia's demand that NATO stop its expansion isn't exactly unreasonable, considering NATO countries made several promises that the NATO alliance wouldn't expand past Germany. These promises were since broken, and leading US national security figures openly dream of regime change inside Russia itself. Fast forward to 2013, when pro-EU protesters took aim at Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, who was playing the EU and Russia against each other and wanted Ukraine to stay out of NATO. After Yanukovych announced a deal with some in the opposition, the more extreme elements, led by literal armed Nazis, seized the president's palace. These protesters were openly supported by American politicians and ushered in a new far-right, anti-Russian government that aggressively sought Ukraine's membership in NATO. From Russia's perspective, you can see why this coup in Ukraine was so serious. Russia was already surrounded by NATO countries, and foreign powers invaded Russia through Ukraine in both world wars. The admission of Ukraine would mean that any future clash on Russia's border would trigger mutual defense obligations for all NATO members and essentially produce World War III. On top of that, when people in the eastern Ukrainian region called the Donbass rejected the new coup government and saw closer ties with Russia, a civil war began. Fighting in Donbass has gone on for 7 years and claimed over 14,000 lives. For those 7 years, Russia worked to uphold the Minsk Agreement, which was supposed to deliver peace by giving the eastern part of the country autonomy. This never happened, and the fighting escalated again, which is what brings us to today. So whatever you think of this specific decision, the history is clear. At every step of the way, this conflict was instigated and inflamed by NATO's aggression. So if the US and EU really want to see a peaceful resolution to the tensions in Ukraine, their first step should be to disband this relic of the Cold War.